Welcome to Buried Secrets, a podcast about the paranormal, the occult, and weird and forgotten history. I'm Chris. In this episode, I am continuing my extremely comprehensive look at Fordham University's many hauntings. So, last time I talked about, haunted dorms at Fordham that didn't really deserve their own episode, but still had some interesting stories. And this time, I'm basically doing that, but for buildings on campus that students did not live in. So like classroom buildings, admin buildings, that sort of thing. Because there are some of those that have stories of hauntings as well. Which is kind of interesting when you think about it, because it makes sense for dorms to have hauntings because you spend so much time in your dorm room, sleeping or studying or whatever. Whereas these other buildings that you're maybe just passing through or just spending a little bit of your day in, it's interesting that those buildings have all these stories as well. So in case you're just jumping in here on this series, quick refresher, Fordham University is a Jesuit school in the Bronx, though there's also a couple other campuses, including a Manhattan campus. And I've been making the case, or trying to make the case, that the Bronx campus at Fordham University, the Rose Hill campus as it's called, is perhaps the most concentrated area of hauntings in New York City. I at least have not been able to disprove that, because it really is a lot of stories in a very small area. So anyway, let's get into it. So the first building I want to talk about, I always knew as the administration building, but now I think it's called the Cuniffe House. It's Cuniffe. It was renamed after a trustee in 2013, so after my time there. And I'm probably going to end up calling it the administration building a lot because I know how to pronounce that word, or that set of words. So the administration building was like the old manor house for Rose Hill Manor, before it was a university. Technically, it's the second manor house. There was another before it that was built in maybe 1692 or 1694, depending on what you're reading. The administration building, I've also heard it called the Moat Mansion, because the Moat family once owned that land. And I've read lots of stuff about there being different old historic hospitals supposedly on campus, and a lot of those seem to just be urban legends, a lot of those stories. And I talked about this in a previous episode. There was a hospital called Fordham Hospital that was on land that now is part of Fordham University, but that land's a parking lot now. But in my research, I did find that in 1846, the old manor house was used as an infirmary and a residence by the Sisters of Charity. So that's at least one building that was used for a time for a hospital sort of purpose, at least a medical sort of purpose. So this is obviously one of the oldest buildings on campus. And I found this interesting article on Fordham's website about what life used to be like on Fordham's campus back in the day. And one interesting thing is that there used to be a farm at Fordham until 1907. And I wanted to read a bit from that article because it talks about what life was like for students and how the building that's now Cuniffe House, or the administration building, was used. So to read from that, the food was produced within inside of the building, today's Cuniffe House, where the students studied, slept, and ate. On the site of the Rose Hill Gym was an orchard that produced apples, pears, and cherries. Potatoes, corn, and other crops were also grown on campus. A vineyard on the site of today's college cemetery yielded 2 or 3 barrels of wine per year, and the field at present-day Fordham Prep was a pasture populated by 30 to 40 cows. Dietary staples at Rose Hill included beef and pork. Pigs as well as cows were raised at the farm. On special occasions, students dined on oysters and other shellfish. Bread was probably baked on campus, and vegetables might have been grown in a greenhouse east of the university church. The Jesuit brothers oversaw food production. After a few decades, the students' dining area was moved from today's Cuniff House to a newly completed space in Dealey Hall. Eating was a solemn affair, far removed from the freewheeling atmosphere of today's campus dining venues. It was strictly regulated by the college's Rules and Customs book, according to a chapter by Gilbert and Wines in Fordham, The Early Years. A student read aloud from literature or history during meals, and number 5 in the rules for the refectory section of the customs book required students to eat in silence so they could, quote, give an account of what is read if called upon. Students stopped eating at the ringing of the bell and rose to face the prefect, answer a prayer, and make the sign of the cross before turning to silently leave in single file with their arms folded. Indeed, students were expected to keep quiet during most of their daily routine, which was akin to the rigors of a, quote, medieval monastic regime, according to Monsignor Shelley's book, Fordham, A History of the Jesuit University of New York, 1841 to 2003. But they still found moments for food-related levity, he wrote, quote, God sent food, the devil sent cooks, the students would gripe, echoing a long-standing complaint of college students everywhere. So I just thought that anecdote was interesting because, talking about haunted buildings, etc., the image of all these students, which I assume also included people who were, at the prep school, so not just college students. The image of all these students like sitting and eating in silence and filing out and doing all this stuff kind of like in unison, like it's honestly surprising to me that there's not a story of a haunting borrowing some of that imagery, because I think it's great and creepy and terrifying. Or, the like reading of the literature during lunch or whatever. But I just thought that was interesting and kind of paints a picture of what this building was once used for. Now it's just like administration offices, I think. So while the current uses of the building aren't the most fascinating thing in the world, there is a really interesting legend that says that the old manor house was used as George Washington's headquarters at some point during the Revolutionary War, but I don't think that claim has been substantiated. Fordham Manor is supposedly mentioned in James Fenimore Cooper's book, The Spy, though I did a text search of The Spy for a lot of key phrases like Fordham, Rose Hill, Manor, headquarters, both the old and new spellings of Bronx, and I came up totally empty-handed, so it must have been a fairly oblique reference in that book. But here's a bit about this legend to do with George Washington from the 1891 book, A History of St. John's College. Tradition ascribes to this time-honored relic the distinction of having served as General Washington's headquarters during some of the maneuvers preceding the Battle of White Plains. Among the many venerable trees that surround and overshadow the houses is the identical tree, so says again infallible tradition, to which the father of his country tied his horse on dismounting. It is believed by a great many that this old manor house is the building in and about which the principal incidents described in Fenimore Cooper's novel The Spy took place. So I like how even this 1891 source is sarcastic about infallible tradition. At least I assume that's sarcasm. So, it's an urban legend, it's probably not true, but it is an interesting piece of lore tied to the building. And, even if it was true, it would have been the old manor house because, the current administration building was constructed in 1838, and the old manor house was torn down in 1896. So let's get into some ghost stories. The most common story that I've heard about the administration building is that supposedly it smells like cigars all the time. People say there's a ghostly story behind that. I assume some former resident or Jesuit who was in the vicinity often was supposed to have smoked cigars, but I've never found like a super concrete backstory for that. There's an October 28th, 1983 article in the student newspaper, The Ram, that talks a little bit about some of the stories. So to read from that, there have been a couple of cases of old Jesuits floating around here, says Norris Clark, Society of Jesus. The old Jesuit walking on the second floor of the administration building has been seen by a number of people, he added. one of two buildings on campus to predate the arrival of the Jesuits, the other is the University Church. The administration building has served as everything from a student residence hall to a library since its construction in 1838. According to Clark, a few elderly priests lived there when the second floor served as an infirmary several years ago. In the recent past, a student worker was upstairs after hours when he saw an elderly Jesuit walking around aimlessly. He made an attempt at conversation but got no response. Later, according to Clark, the student asked a group of priests about his late-night visitor. Upon describing him to them, they said to the young man, "Well, he's been dead for a number of years." And this is, I think, maybe one of the most common recurring tropes in the urban legends about Fordham. This idea that, a young man, a male student, meets a Jesuit and has a nice encounter, then asks people about the Jesuit, and they're like, that person's been dead for a long time. So it's a fun trope, even though stories like this one definitely just seem like an urban legend. Anytime there's not a specific person who's standing behind a story, then it starts to look more and more like an urban legend. But another common story about the building, which the 1983 article talks about, is there's a supposed haunting on the first floor of the administration building where a bunch of the portraits of Fordham's past presidents hang. And supposedly, the ghosts of past presidents emerge from the paintings when they want to see how things are going. Really liked that detail. It's almost like a Harry Potter painting thing, So now let's talk about Keating Hall. This building was built in 1935, and it is kind of like the university's flagship trademark sort of building. It towers over the quad in the middle of campus, and it looks really nice. It's very gothic, it's very cool. There's stained glass, there's a tower with a clock. It's cool. It holds classrooms, some big lecture hall, auditorium type rooms, a chapel, and there's also stuff like in the basement, there's a radio station. And at least when I was a student, there was a language lab in the basement, and some of The Exorcist was filmed apparently in the language lab in the basement. However, language labs, I assume, aren't a thing anymore, so I don't know what's there now. And the basement room that was used in the filming of The Exorcist was also used as the Pentagon office in the movie A Beautiful Mind. A lot of buildings were filmed at Fordham. And if I'm remembering right, I think that part of Wall Street 2 was also filmed in Keating Hall. I think I remember that from the trailer, though I never saw Wall Street 2. So, it's a beautiful building. And in terms of hauntings and dark history relating to Keating Hall, like I mentioned, I keep reading stuff online saying that Keating Hall used to be a hospital. I don't know what people are talking about. I have not been able to confirm Keating Hall having been used as a hospital. It's one of the, relatively newer classroom buildings on campus since it was built in the 30s. And I tried to figure out whether it was used maybe as a hospital or medical facility during World War II, but it doesn't look like that was the case. Fordham was a site for 2 Army Specialized Training Program units. So in June 1943, the gym was a dorm for troops. And at one time, there were 788 troops staying there. And then after that, the Army did requisition some buildings, which included, the gym, Dealey Hall, and part of Keating. But that was just to use as housing for 900 Army Postal Service members who were there until 1945. And Keating Hall used to have a cafeteria in it. And apparently, at one point during the war effort, 2,750 meals were served in the cafeteria in Keating Hall every day. But that's like an interesting piece of history about Keating Hall, but again, I'm not seeing stuff about a hospital. So, supposedly, Keating Hall was built on top of old morgue tunnels, and, I've also read that there was a hospital, that the hospital that was supposedly there was there in the 1830s, but again, haven't found reputable sources saying this. In terms of the tunnels, I don't think there's morgue tunnels since it wasn't a hospital, but I would imagine that it is connected to the steam/electricity tunnels that link a lot of buildings on campus. I talked more about that a few episodes ago. But I feel like some people's imaginations really ran away from them on some of these Keating Hall stories in terms of the building's history, since it doesn't really have a super long history. There's an October 2005 article that I found in the Columbia Spectator, which is Columbia University's student newspaper, which recounts some of the stories of Keating Hall, which I just thought was funny, that, it was well known enough that even Columbia's writing about it. But to read from that, the first floor of the building has chairs and historical items on display, but few students sit on them because of the feeling of being watched. There are also cold spots, even in the summer, and people often say they are the spirits of Jesuits that have passed. On the third floor, there are many reports of being touched on the shoulder and seeing ghosts while in the auditorium. A chair tumbling down the stairs without anyone present has been witnessed more than once. So I can confirm myself that there were cold spots in the building. I remember feeling them on the first floor, in the interior area leading towards the big auditorium there. I remember that there were sort of these connected interior hallways with benches, if I'm remembering right. And I specifically felt cold spots while there. And I remember I'd read that was an urban legend. And so I did try to find out where they were coming from. And I didn't see any obvious air conditioning vents where I was feeling them, or drafts from the windows, etc. So maybe they could be paranormal. It's a little hard to say, though. So I found this really fun video on YouTube that was posted on October 29th, 2021. So it actually went up after I'd already started working on this series, so I was excited to find it. And this video was produced by the Truman High School Media Program. Truman High School is a school in Co-op City, so if you know the Bronx, it's, kind of by Pelham. It's like a little ways away from Fordham, but not so far. And it recounts one person's story, one Fordham grad's story. So a teacher at the school, a Ms. Storino, had an experience in Keating Hall her freshman year. And the video, it's an interview with her, so she actually recounts the story herself. So her story is this. She went into the bathroom, and when she went to wash her hands, the automatic sink wouldn't turn on. And as she was trying to get it to turn on, suddenly, all of the lights in the room turned off. Then one of the other sinks turned on by itself, and she went over there to wash her hands, and it turned off when she got there. Then the window slammed, and the lights turned back on all at once, and then all the sinks turned on at the same time. And I love this story because, a lot of paranormal stories, they're like, one small thing happened and I got a bad feeling. And I'm not saying that to discount those sorts of paranormal stories. Not at all. But I do love this because it's like, wow, this is like a really clear chain of events of like things external to her going haywire. So I just think it's really interesting. And in the interview, she did try to think through what mundane stuff could have caused all of this to happen at once. So she did mention that the sinks were new automatic sinks. So maybe there could have been a glitch in the electronics tied to those sinks since they were recently installed. Seems possible, I guess. She also said it was March, so it was windy. So who knows, maybe the window slammed shut because of the wind. It's one of those things, it's like, yeah, I guess that stuff is possible, but to me, it seems fairly obvious where it's like, well, that's just weird for all of that to happen at once. So I thought that was a really interesting story, and one additional point of interest is that her grandfather, both parents, and her sister all went to Fordham. So she was aware of Fordham being haunted before she started there as a student. And I kind of have mentioned in previous episodes how Fordham is definitely one of those schools where it's like, a whole family will go there. It's very, very common. But that does feed into the idea of this oral history or like these urban legends that get repeated. If people are going to school there and they're like, I know about all the creepy hauntings that my parents, told me that they remember hearing, as an urban legend when they were students. So it's just a way that these stories kind of get transmitted and codified, I guess. So, to look at some other stories about hauntings in Keating Hall, there are some claims that the clock tower there is haunted. I found an article published in the Fordham Ram called Truths of a Forbidden Tower Revealed. It looks like it was originally published in 2013. And to read from this article, which is talking about people sneaking up into the clock tower, Blair Hassel, Fordham College at Rose Hill, 2012, attests to a scary but worthwhile experience. It was a lot of fun and kind of dangerous, especially when my phone lost battery in the dark, she said. But once we were up there, the view was breathtaking. Marin O'Connor, Fordham College at Rose Hill, 2012, accompanied Hassel in the tower. She offers this warning to future climbers. Beware of the ghosts. Blair's phone died on the way down, and Kelly swears a ghost tickled her neck. So, kind of interesting. There's these students trespassing in a place where they're not supposed to be. Like, in theory, the entrance to the clock tower is supposed to be locked. People aren't supposed to get up there. So, already if you're trespassing somewhere, you kind of have that heightened sense of like, is there someone there? Is there someone watching me, etc.? And like phones can just run out of batteries. But it is totally true that there have been many stories of people on paranormal investigations, for example, where they, have just charged up their gear and then they just find a battery draining on a device that they know they just charged, batteries that they knew were fresh, etc. So maybe that could be a ghost thing, maybe not. And the whole thing with the ghost tickling someone's neck, it's like, yeah, that's another one where it's like, yeah, maybe so. Maybe there was also a draft, but totally possible. One side note about the tower, honestly, like I've read articles that made it sound like climbing up to the clock tower at Keating Hall was some sort of rite of passage. When I was a student, I didn't even know that was like a thing that people did. Like it never once crossed my mind to like try to figure out how to get up there. I don't even know where the door is. But I guess for some people it was sort of a rite of passage. But it's worth mentioning the clock tower is off limits and it's dangerous. And when I was researching this, I did see that in 2019, a student fell to her death from the clock tower. So I don't think it's the safest place to be trespassing. I guess, there's a good reason for why they don't let people up there. And that's a really sad and tragic story. So on that gloomy note, that's Keating Hall. So the next building I want to talk about is Collins Auditorium. This building was built in 1904. It was originally the law school building, and the law school was supposed to use facilities at Xavier, which is a Catholic school downtown, but when enrollment at Xavier increased, they didn't have space, so the law school was moved to Collins. Nowadays, there's a standard theater in there, there's a black box theater, I think the philosophy department offices are in there, and probably other stuff, but that's the main stuff that's in Collins. I wanted to read a bit from the Fordham Library's page about hauntings at Fordham. So to read from that, with the hauntings around Collins, even the faculty are spooked. They and students alike have reported seeing a man walking around the balconies. The same ghostly figure is often blamed for things being rearranged or moved backstage before performances. So that's, the balconies in the theater. So, haunted theaters are a big thing. That makes sense. There's a 2010 article that I found in the RAM that claims that Father Collins, the university president at the time that the building was constructed, is the ghost who haunts the theater. Though that seems convenient to me. Did he have some sort of love of theater? Is there some reason why he would be hanging out there? Maybe so, maybe not. I didn't do a super deep dive into this story of Johnny Collins, but that's who people think is the ghost. There's a website called theramrealm.com that had a 2014 article that quotes an anonymous student who talks about the supposed ghost that haunts Collins Auditorium. So this person said, Johnny is harmless, but he likes to make his presence known. It can be frustrating when we're practicing and then the lights just go off. Collins is where I spend half my semester practicing. I think Johnny likes the company. So, sounds like a friendly ghost, at least. And, it's hard to say who a ghost is unless they tell you or you see them. Otherwise you're kind of just grasping at straws, thinking of who this person could possibly be. It's generally my contention that a building like this, like if it had just been named after someone else, probably that someone else would be who people thought the ghost was, but who knows? Maybe people have another reason for thinking that it's Johnny Collins. Just, there's nothing that I saw. And I mean, it is nice to have this fun theater tradition of having this ghost around and talking about this ghost, etc. And, I don't blame them for assuming that Johnny Collins, the person who the theater is named after, is the person who's haunting it. Why not? There's no other strong evidence about who the entity may be. So that wraps up the Rose Hill ghost stories I wanted to tell. Though don't worry, I still have a couple more episodes of analysis, etc. of Fordham ghosts and hauntings. I want to look at this one strange story, as well as just, I want to do a general episode about what makes a place haunted and kind of look at some of the things that people claim causes hauntings and look at, what unfortunate things may have happened on Fordham's campus and kind of see not even what conclusions can we draw, but like what stories might there be to perhaps explain why there are so many hauntings at Fordham or so many urban legends, etc. So don't worry, there's 2 more episodes left about Fordham stuff. But before I close, I do want to tell some stories about Fordham's other campuses. So I mentioned there is a Manhattan campus that Fordham has. It's called Lincoln Center. It's by the Lincoln Center Performing Arts Complex, and it's by the southwest corner of Central Park. There are very few stories that I was able to find about Lincoln Center, but I did find a few mentions of weirdness in one of the residence halls and then one of the the classroom building there. So first, let's look at the stories from McMahon Hall, which was built in 1993 and is a 20-story dorm. And this is from an October 2017 article in the Fordham Observer, and it's an article I've read several anecdotes from already. It's a great article. So it tells the story of someone who lived in the hall named Sam Tracy, who was class of 2019, who said this: "I was exhausted. I had Pilates in the morning, so I figured I would go to bed early. While I liked the idea of having the apartment to myself, something just didn't feel right, but I attributed it to being naturally paranoid and the spooky nature of October." So Sam, kind of put aside her uneasiness and she got ready for bed. And to read from the article, "Just like a typical night, Sam shut her door and laid on her bed with her back facing her door. That's when she began to hear her door open and close. My door has never shut all the way. The door just doesn't fit the frame properly. So I didn't think anything of it at first. Sam turned to look at her door and didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but when she returned to her position facing the wall, she heard her door open and close again. This happened a few times, and the door only seemed to move when I was facing the wall. Yeah, it was strange, but it was also starting to annoy me. Sam got up and opened her door, but didn't find anything. I've seen my roommate prop her desk chair against the door before, so I did that and got back in bed. I figured that would stop my door from opening and closing." Sam paused to recollect herself for a second, then continued, "But the opposite happened. I turned to face the wall and got comfortable. And then all of a sudden, the door began rapidly banging against the chair as if someone was violently attempting to break in. Instead of facing whatever was at the door head on, Sam decided to pull the covers over her head and tried to go to sleep. I reasoned with the ghost. I basically said, 'Hey, I have Pilates in the morning, so I'd appreciate if you don't do this tonight,' and it seemed to work. The banging eventually stopped, and I was able to go to sleep. But it was the spookiest thing I've ever experienced." Since this incident, Sam hasn't experienced anything else in her apartment, but she believes someone definitely wanted to make their presence known that night. So a couple interesting things about this story. So interesting that this happened, while she was alone, her roommate wasn't there, I think with stories like this, it's easy to be like, well, maybe the window was open and the door was rattling because of that. And, the wind was blowing it open. And then when she put the chair there, it's just making it rattle against the chair. You could say that really easily, but I think that, she lives in this room. She's used to what the door is usually like and how it usually behaves. So it would be weird if just suddenly, for no reason, it behaved that way on a night where she already had been feeling a little bit weird, feeling like there might have been some sort of presence there already, etc. My general feeling with these sorts of hauntings is like, if you live somewhere and you're used to how things work there, and something seems off and, a door keeps opening or whatever, then at least to me, that story feels really credible, and that type of story feels really credible. I think it's a totally different story if you're not at home, like if you're at a hotel or some other room and a door opens or slams shut or whatever, and, maybe something paranormal is going on, maybe the door is just a little finicky, but because you don't live there, you don't know how different weather conditions and different factors affect that door. But yeah, if you live somewhere and you're like, my door doesn't usually behave quite like this, then that's interesting, I think. So then the article also tells the story of another student. So this story is from Jasmine Fontana, who was college of 2019, who, quote, recalled seeing a ghostly figure. So to read from the article, it was the night before Halloween. I just remember waking up and feeling a presence. I looked near my bed and it appeared to be a person in rags with a black aura and smoke where their feet should have been. When asked if she was as scared as Sam was, Jasmine replied, "No, I was more intrigued. It was magnificent, really. It made me want to learn about the history of the building and who the figure could have been." So that's interesting, right? Like a much more dramatic story, actually seeing some sort of entity, etc., but really interesting. So I was only able to dig up one other story about Fordham's Lincoln Center campus, and this one's really, really weak, but there's a building on campus called Lowenstein, which was built in 1969. It was the building that I spent the most time at Lincoln Center because I did take some classes there, and my classes were in that building. It has classrooms, the bookstore, a theater, etc. So I found an article in the Fordham Observer from October 28th, 1998, and the article is mostly jokey. The article talks about how the building's so new, so it doesn't make sense for there to be hauntings there, etc. And the writer mentions, one strange thing she's noticed, and then she comes up with a fictional story, sort of like a ghost story she made up around this thing, which, is fictional and just for fun, whatever. But to read from this article, here's what this student said. Have you ever wandered by the new photo ID room when it's closed, either late at night or on weekends? If so, you may have taken notice of a strange yet persistent phenomenon. Whenever the photo ID room door is closed, an eerie tapping is heard from within. It is repeated and insistent, and it is always there. When I first heard it a month ago, I thought it was an isolated incident. Each time thereafter, though, I become more and more intrigued. Where was this sound coming from? What did it mean? So that's interesting, right? Like, maybe there's something in there that's like, I don't know, like hanging from something and hitting something else. I don't know, but kind of interesting. Maybe it's nothing. Like I said, it was pretty hard to find stories of hauntings from the Lincoln Center campus, which even though the buildings are pretty new, it still seems weird to me. But I feel like Fordham, its Rose Hill campus, just looks like a creepy college. So it just like attracts these urban legends and stuff. And so I'd imagine that somewhere that just looks more modern, looks less gothic and sort of foreboding would just, there'd just be fewer stories because you're not like thinking about gothic tales while walking around the grounds or whatever. So last thing I want to mention this episode is Marymount College. So a lot of people maybe haven't heard of Marymount College. It's not to be confused with Marymount Manhattan, which is a separate college in Manhattan that is not affiliated with Fordham. No, there used to be this college called Marymount College in Westchester, which is, the suburbs of New York City. And it was a women's school. And I believe it merged with Fordham in the early 2000s. Actually, I just pulled up the Wikipedia page. In 2000, they consolidated with Fordham. So the college was then called Marymount College of Fordham University. And then in October 2005, they announced that Marymount was going to close. And it closed in 2007. And they said that it wasn't, the quote on Wikipedia says, "It is no longer academically or financially feasible to continue to operate Marymount College as a separate school within the university." And I remember, even when I was a student, I remember hearing like whispers about this being a little shady. But I guess until today, I never bothered to look up what people were saying. So I just want to read this paragraph from Wikipedia real quick. In August 2007, Fordham announced it would sell the Marymount campus. The decision disappointed many alumni, as the university had purchased the college with the promise that it would try to continue to operate it as a women's institution. The university claimed unjustifiable and disproportionate costs to maintain the large campus as reason for closure. Skeptics saw the acquisition of the college as a real estate venture. On February 17th, 2008, Fordham announced the sale of the campus for $27 million to EF Education, a chain of private language instruction schools. I don't want to get in trouble or accuse anyone of anything, so of course I would never do that. But let's just say I tend to be a skeptic on things, especially things relating to money and real estate. And, in a lot of episodes, I've talked about how real estate is, the villain of most New York City stories, private developers, money to be made from real estate, etc. So I don't know. That's what people allege about Marymount's campus and what happened there. So that's why, whether or not you went to Fordham, I think you're very unlikely to have heard of Marymount College or known the story behind it. And one other thing that is probably useful to know is that Marymount College was in Tarrytown, New York. And just one thing to know is that Tarrytown is right by Sleepy Hollow. So, everybody knows about Sleepy Hollow, Washington Irving, etc. So it's an area with, I think, some ghostly pedigree, I guess. So here's the story I was able to dig up, kind of just a rumor about Marymount College. So this is to read from hauntedplacesofusa.blogspot.com, which I'm sure is a very reputable source. So to read from that, the ghosts of founders Father Gaelak, I'm really sorry, looks like an Irish name and I really don't know how to pronounce it. Anyway, and Mother Butler roam the halls of the dorms and protect the girls of this women's college. Evil spirits lurk in Saki parking lot, left behind when the Saki house was torn down before the college was built in 1907. Most haunted dorms, Gaelhack, or however you say it, Hall and Gerard Hall. Strange phenomenon exist in these halls, from invisible bed guests to bed shaking and the constant feeling of being watched. Beware, students, and stay far away from Ouija boards. So, very, very non-specific. Not a lot to go on there. I looked at the comments on this article, and one person in 2013 said, "I work there and I just recently had an experience. I saw a shadowy figure move from right to left. It was awesome, and also heard whistling." So because this comment is from 2013, I assume they must work at the new, language school that's there. But that's interesting. Love a shadow figure. Another anonymous commenter said, "Neat trick on Father Gaelak's part if he found his way to Tarrytown. He died before the college was founded and wasn't in on the planning of the college. He knew nothing about it. His role was as founder of the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary in Béziers, France. Father Butler is buried in the crypt of the now Marymount Convent. In my years at Marymount, I can't say I ever met her wandering around, but I know she was very much loved by students who knew her when she was alive." So then it talks about some factual inaccuracies in the original post and talks about Sacré-Cœur Hall or Saki. So to read a bit more, It was one of our favorite dorms because it was a nice old mansion with turrets and a wide veranda with a view of the Hudson River. Haunted? I doubt it. In any case, if there are spirits slouching around the parking lot, they're benevolent ones. Sorry to burst your bubble, but Marymount was a fine old college that provided a wonderful education to generations of young women. It's not haunted. So I just really enjoyed this whole, I guess you could call it an exchange, this whole thing, because I think there is something to observe here about skeptics and people who are kind of like, well, this isn't haunted because of X. And, this person is basically saying that a school can't give a good education to generations of young women if it's haunted, right? Like, this person's definitely arguing that they're mutually exclusive, which, doesn't really make sense. But then also, I love that this person's like, well, if there are spirits, they're nice, which is just amazing. This person really loved Marymount, which I think is great. And you can tell that she was like, she really wants to defend it. She's like, it's not haunted, but if they are, the ghosts are nice. And I think that her point about Father Galak, I think that every time I've said his name, I've said it differently. Father G, I think she has a point about that, where like a lot of the time people decide that someone is haunting a place just because either they've been there once or it's named after them or whatever. So, I think that it's right to be skeptical about that one. And, I love the idea of this beautiful old mansion that sounds like a haunted mansion with, turrets and the veranda overlooking the Hudson. And if you listen to an episode that I did, I don't know, it was probably in like 2020 or something, or early 2021. There's an episode I did about the Ghostbusters ruling, which was about a haunted house in Nyack, which I think is, roughly across the Hudson River from this area. So I kind of like the idea of the Hudson being kind of bookended by these sounds like two beautiful Victorian mansions that may or may not be haunted. So just thought that was nice. And also, like, I always felt bad about Marymount. It was the forgotten college. It was shut down so quickly after it merged with Fordham. And, it's almost a ghost itself, where, it doesn't exist anymore. It's definitely dead. But there's still all these people with all these memories of going there, etc. So, wanted to close on that one. Like I said, I've got 2 more Fordham-related episodes coming, and then I'll talk about something else. But if you went to Fordham and have any stories about strange things that happened to you, please feel free to reach out. My email is buriedsecretspodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Instagram at buriedsecretspodcast. Show notes and sources and everything for this episode and every episode are at buriedsecretspodcast.com. And if you like this episode, please rate and review. Please tell your friends about it. That really, helps people find the podcast. And thanks so much for listening.